and welcome to the Page Turners with Miss Beth here at Pueblo West Library. And welcome back to James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl. If you remember last time where we left off, the critters inside the peach and James Henry Trotter managed to whoop a bunch of seagulls to the top of the peach that lifted it out of the dangerous shark-infested waters. And I think that's one of the most exciting parts of this book so far, one of my favorite parts. But let's see what happens, where they go now. They're floating through the sky, so I can only imagine where they're going next. In a flash, everybody was up on top. "Oh, isn't it beautiful?" they cried. "What a marvelous feeling. Goodbye, sharks." "Oh boy, this is the way to travel." Miss Spider, who was literally squealing with excitement, grabbed the centipede by the waist, and the two of them started dancing around and around the peach stem together. The earthworm stood up on his tail and did a sort of wiggle of joy, all by himself, and the old green grasshopper kept hopping higher and higher and higher in the air. The ladybug rushed over and shook James warmly by the hand. The glowworm, who at the best of times was a very shy and silent creature, sat glowing with pleasure near the tunnel entrance. Even the silkworm, looking white and thin and completely exhausted from making all the string that they used to tie the seagulls up with, came creeping out of the tunnel to watch this miraculous ascent. Up and up they went, and soon they were as high as the top of a church steeple above the ocean. "I'm a bit worried about the peach," James said to the others as soon as all the dancing and shouting had stopped. "I wonder how much damage those sharks have done to it underneath. It's quite impossible to tell from up here." "Why don't I go over the side and make an inspection?" Miss Spider said. "It'll be no trouble at all, I assure you." And without waiting for an answer, she quickly produced a length of silk thread and attached the end of it to the peach stem. "I'll be back in a jiffy," she said, and then she walked calmly over to the edge of the peach and jumped off, paying out the thread behind her as she fell. The others crowded anxiously around the place where she had gone over. "Wouldn't it be dreadful if the thread broke?" the ladybug said. There was a rather long silence. "Are you all right, Miss Spider?" shouted the old green grasshopper. "Yes, thank you," her voice answered from below. "I'm coming up now." And up she came, climbing foot over foot up the silk thread, and at the same time tucking the thread back cleverly into her body as she climbed past it. "Is it awful?" they asked her. "Is it eaten all away? Are there great holes in it everywhere?" Miss Spider clambered back up onto the deck with a pleased but also rather puzzled look on her face. So she looked really confused. "You won't believe this," she said, "but actually there's hardly any damage down there at all. The peach is almost untouched. There are just a few tiny pieces out of it here and there, but nothing more." "You must be mistaken," James told her. "Of course she's mistaken," the centipede said. "I promise you I'm not," Miss Spider answered. "But there were hundreds of sharks around us. They turned the water into a froth. We saw their great mouths opening and shutting." "I don't care what you saw," Miss Spider answered. "They certainly didn't do much damage to the peach." "Then why did we start sinking?" the centipede asked. "Perhaps we didn't start sinking," the old green grasshopper suggested. "Perhaps we were all so frightened that we simply imagined it." This, in point of fact, was closer to the truth than any of them knew. A shark, you see, has an extremely long, sharp nose. And its mouth is set very awkwardly underneath its face and a long way back. This makes it more or less impossible for it to get its teeth into a vast, smooth, curving surface, such as the side of a peach. Even if the creature turns onto its back, it still can't do it, because the nose always gets in the way. If you ever seen a small dog trying to get its teeth into an enormous ball, then you'll be able to imagine roughly how it was with the sharks in the peach. "It must have been some kind of magic," the ladybug said. "The holes must have healed up by themselves." "Oh, look, there's a ship below us," shouted James. Everyone rushed to the side and peered over. None of them had ever seen a ship before. It looks like a big one. It's got 3 funnels. You can even see the people on the decks. Let's wave to them. Do you think they can see us? Neither James nor any of the others knew it, but the ship that was now passing beneath them was actually the Queen Mary, sailing out of the English Channel on her way to America. And on the bridge of the Queen Mary, the astonished captain was standing with a group of his officers, all of them gaping at the great big round ball hovering overhead. I don't like that, said the captain. Nor do I, said the first officer. Do you think it's following us? Said the second officer. I tell you, I don't like it, muttered the captain. It could be dangerous, the first officer said. That's it, cried the captain. It's a secret weapon. Holy cow, send a message to the Queen at once. The country must be warned, and give me my telescope. The first officer handed the telescope to the captain. The captain put it to his eye. There's birds everywhere, he cried. The whole sky is teeming with birds. What in the world are they doing? And wait a second, there are people on it. I can see them moving. There's do I have this thing focused right? It looks like a little boy in short trousers. Yes, I can distinctly see a little boy in short trousers standing up there. And there's a sort of a giant ladybug. Now, just a minute, Captain, the first officer said, and a colossal green grasshopper. Captain, the first officer said sharply, Captain, please. And a mammoth spider. Oh dear, he's been working at it again, whispered the second officer. And an simply enormous centipede, screamed the captain. Call the ship's doctor, the first said. Our captain is not well. A moment later, the great round ball disappeared into the cloud, and the people on the ship never saw it again. There they are, on the ship, checking out the peach in the sky. Chapter 24. But up on the peach itself, everyone was still happy and excited. I wonder where we'll finish up this time, the earthworm said. Who cares, they answered. Seagulls always go back to the land sooner or later. Up and up they went, high above the highest clouds, the peach swaying gently from side to side as it floated along. Wouldn't this be a perfect time for a little music, the ladybug asked. How about it, old green grasshopper? With pleasure, dear lady, the old green grasshopper answered, bowing from the waist. Oh, hooray! He's going to play for us, they cried, and immediately the whole company sat themselves down in a circle around the grasshopper, and the concert started. From the moment that the first note was struck, the audience became completely spellbound. And as for James, never had he heard such beautiful music as this. In the garden at home on summer evenings, he had listened many times to the sound of grasshoppers chirping in the grass. And he had always liked the noise that they made, but this was a different kind of noise altogether. This was real music, chords, harmonies, tunes, and all the rest of it. And what a wonderful instrument the old green grasshopper was playing on. It was like a violin. It was almost exactly as though he were playing upon a violin. The bow of the violin, the part that moved, was his back leg. The strings of the violin, the part that made the sound, was the edge of his wing. He was using only the top of his back leg, his thigh, and he was stroking us up and down against the edge of his wing with incredible skill, sometimes slowly and sometimes fast, but always with the same easy flowing action. It was precisely the way a clever violinist would have used his bow, and the music came pouring out and filled the whole blue sky around them with magic melodies. When the first part was finished, everyone clapped madly, and Miss Spider stood up and shouted, "Bravo! Encore! Give us more!" "Did you like that, James?" the old green grasshopper asked, smiling at the small boy. "Oh, I loved it," James answered. "It was beautiful. It was as though you had a real violin in your hands." "A real violin?" the old green grasshopper cried. "Good heavens, I like that. My dear boy, I am a real violin. It is part of my own body." "But do all grasshoppers play their music on violins?" The same way as you do? James asked him. So here's our green grasshopper. If you've ever heard a grasshopper make noise, it does kind of sound like music sometimes, especially when you get a lot of them together in the same field. No, he answered, not all. If you want to know, I happen to be a short-horned grasshopper. I have two short feelers coming out of my head. Can you see them? There they are. They're quite short, aren't they? That's why they call me a shorthorn. And we shorthorns are the only ones who play our music in the violin style, using a bow. My long-horned relatives, the ones who have long, curvy feelers coming out of their heads, make their music simply by rubbing the edges of their top two wings together. They are not violinists, they're wing rubbers. And a rather inferior noise these wing rubbers produce, too, if I may say so. It sounds more like a banjo than a fiddle. How fascinating this all is, cried James. And to think that up until now I had never even wondered how a grasshopper made his sounds. My dear young fellow, the old green grasshopper said gently, there are a lot of things in this world of ours that you haven't started wondering about yet. Where, for example, do you think I keep my ears? Your ears? Why, in your head, of course. Everyone burst out laughing. You mean you don't even know that? Cried the centipede. Try again, said the old green grasshopper, smiling at James. You can't possibly keep them anywhere else. Oh, can't I? Well, I give up. Where do you keep them? Right here, the old green grasshopper said, one on each side of my tummy. It's not true. Of course it's true. What's so peculiar about that? You ought to see where my cousins, the crickets and the katydids, keep theirs. Where do they keep them? In their legs, one in each front leg, just below the knee. You mean you didn't know that either? The centipede said scornfully. You're joking, James said. Nobody could possibly have ears in his legs. Why not? Because it's ridiculous, that's why. You know what I think is ridiculous, the centipede said, grinning away as usual. I don't mean to be rude, but I think it's ridiculous to have ears on the side of your head. It certainly looks ridiculous. You ought to take a peek in the mirror someday and see for yourself. Pest, cried the earthworm. Why must you always be so rude and rambunctious to everyone? You ought to apologize to James at once. Chapter 25. James didn't want the earthworm and the centipede to get into another argument, so he said quickly to the earthworm, Tell me, do you play any kind of music? No, but I do other things, some of which are really quite extraordinary, the earthworm said, brightening. Such as what? Asked James. Well, the earthworm said, next time you stand in a field or in a garden and look around you, then just remember this, that every grain of soil upon the surface of the land, every tiny little bit of soil that you can see, has actually passed through the body of an earthworm during the last few years. Isn't that wonderful? It's not possible, said James. My dear boy, it's a fact. You mean you actually swallow soil? Like mad, the earthworm said proudly. In one end and out the other. But what's the point? What do you mean, what's the point? Why do you do it? We do it for the farmers. It makes the soil nice and light and crumbly so that things will grow well in it. If you really want to know, the farmers couldn't do it without us. We are essential, which means they are very, very important to the farmers. We are vital, so it is only natural that the farmer should love us. He loves us even more, I believe, than he loves the ladybug. The ladybug, James cried, turning to look at her. Do they love you too? I'm told that they do, the ladybug answered modestly, blushing all over. In fact, I understand that in some places, the farmers love us so much that they go out and buy live ladybugs by the sackful and take them home and set them free in their fields. They are very pleased when they have lots of ladybugs in their fields. But why? James asked. Because we gobble up all the nasty little insects that are gobbling up all the farmers' crops. It helps enormously, and we ourselves don't charge a penny for our services." "I think you're wonderful," James told her. "Can I ask you one special question?" "Please do." "Well, is it really true that I can tell how old a ladybug is by counting her spots?" "Oh no, that's just a children's story," the ladybug said. "We never change our spots. Some of us, of course, are born with more spots than others, but we never change them. The number of spots that a ladybug has is simply a way of showing which branch of the family she belongs to. I, for example, as you can see for yourself, am a 9-spotted ladybug. I'm very lucky. It's a fine thing to be." "It is indeed," said James, gazing at the beautiful scarlet shell with 9 black spots on it. "On the other hand," the ladybug went on, "some of my less fortunate relatives have no more than 2 spots altogether on their shells. Can you imagine that? They're called the 2-spotted ladybugs, and very common and ill-mannered they are, I regret to say. And then, of course, you have the 5-spotted ladybugs. They're much nicer than the 2-spotted ones, although I myself find them a trifle too saucy for my taste." "But they're all of them loved," said James. "Yes," the ladybug answered quietly, "they are all of them loved." "It seems that almost everyone around here is loved," said James. "How nice this is." "Not me," cried the centipede happily. "I'm a pest and I'm proud of it." "Oh, I'm a shocking, dreadful pest." "Hear, hear," the earthworm said. "But what about you, Miss Spider?" asked James. "Aren't you also much loved in the world?" "Alas, no," Miss Spider answered, sighing long and loud. "I am not loved at all, and yet I do nothing but good. All day I catch flies and mosquitoes in my webs. I'm a decent person." "I know you are," said James. "It's very unfair the way we spiders are treated," Miss Spider went on. "Why, only last week her own horrible Aunt Sponge flushed my poor dear father down the plug hole in the bathtub." "Oh, how awful!" cried James. "I watched the whole thing from a corner up in the ceiling," Miss Spider murmured. "It was ghastly. We never saw him again." A large tear rolled down her cheek and fell with a splash on the floor. "But is it not very unlucky to kill a spider?" James inquired, looking around at the others. "Of course it's unlucky to kill a spider," shouted the centipede. "It's about the unluckiest thing anyone can do. Look what happened to Aunt Sponge after she'd done that. Bump! We all felt it, didn't we, as the peach went over her? Oh, what a lovely bump that must have been for you, Miss Spider." "It was very satisfactory," Miss Spider answered. "Will you sing us a song about it, please?" So the centipede did. Everybody clapped and called out for more songs from the centipede, who at once launched into his favorite song of all. "Once upon a time, when pigs were swine and monkeys chewed tobacco and hens took snuff to make—" "Look out, centipede!" cried James. "Look out!" I wonder what's going to happen. Chapter 26. The centipede, who had begun dancing wildly around the deck during the song, had suddenly got too close to the downward curving edge of the peach, and for 3 awful seconds he had stood teetering on the brink, swinging his legs frantically in circles in an effort to stop himself from falling over backward into space. But before anyone could reach him, down he went. He gave a shriek of terror as he fell, and the others, rushing to the side and peering over, saw his poor long body tumbling over and over through the air, getting smaller and smaller until it was out of sight. "Silkworm!" yelled James. "Quick, start spinning!" The silkworm sighed, for she was still very tired from spinning all that silk for the seagulls, but she did as she was told. "I'm going down after him," cried James, grabbing the silk string as it started coming out of the silkworm and tying the end of it around his waist. "The rest of you hold on to Silkworm so I don't pull her over with me. And later on, if you feel 3 tugs on the string, start hauling me up again." He jumped and he went tumbling down after the centipede, down, down, down toward the sea below, and you can imagine how quickly the silkworm had to spin to keep up with the speed of his fall. "We'll never see either of them again," cried the ladybug. Oh dear, just when we are all so happy, too." Miss Spider, the glowworm, and the ladybug all began to cry, and so did the earthworm. I don't care a bit about the centipede, the earthworm sobbed, but I really did love that little boy. Very softly, the old green grasshopper started to play on his violin, and by the time he had finished, everyone, including himself, was in a flood of tears. Suddenly there came 3 sharp tugs on the rope. Pull! Shouted the old green grasshopper. Everyone get behind me and pull! There was about a mile of string to be hauled in, but they all worked like mad. And in the end, over the side of the peach, there appeared a dripping wet James and a dripping wet centipede clinging to him tightly with all 42 of his legs. He saved me, gasped the centipede. He swam around in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean until he found me. My dear boy, the old green grasshopper said, patting James on the back. I do congratulate you. My boots, cried the centipede. Just look at my precious boots. They're ruined by water. Be quiet, the earthworm said. You're lucky to be alive. Are we still going up and up? Asked James. We certainly are, answered the old green grasshopper, and it's beginning to get dark. I know. It'll soon be night. Why don't we all go down below and keep warm until tomorrow morning, the spider suggested. No, the old green grasshopper said. I think that would be very unwise. It will be safer if we all stay up here through the night and keep watch. Then if anything happens, we shall anyway be ready for it. Sounds like a good plan to me. Chapter 27. James Henry Trotter and his companions crouched close together on top of the peach as the night began closing in around them. Clouds like mountains towered high above their heads on all sides, mysterious, menacing, overwhelming. Gradually it grew darker and darker, and then a pale 3/4 moon came up over the tops of the clouds and cast an eerie light over the whole scene. The giant peach swayed gently from side to side as it floated along, and the hundreds of silky white strings going upward from its stem were beautiful in the moonlight. So also was the great flock of seagulls overhead. There was not a sound anywhere. Traveling upon the peach was not in the least like traveling in an airplane. The airplane comes clattering and roaring through the sky, and whatever might be lurking secretly up there in the great cloud mountains goes running for cover at its approach. That is why people in airplanes never see anything. But the peach, yes, the peach was a soft, stealthy traveler, making no noise at all as it floated along, and several times during that long, silent night, ride high up over the middle of the ocean in the moonlight, James and his friends saw things that no one had ever seen before. Once, as they drifted silently past a massive white cloud, they saw on the top of it a group of strange, tall, wispy-looking things that were about twice the height of ordinary men. They were not easy to see at first because they were almost as white as the cloud itself, but as the peach sailed closer, it became obvious that these things were actually living creatures. Tall, wispy, wraith-like, shadowy white creatures who looked as though they were made out of a mixture of cotton wool and candy floss and thin white hairs. Oh, the ladybug said, I don't like this at all. Shh, James whispered back. Don't let them hear you. They must be cloudmen. Cloudmen, they murmured, huddling closer together for comfort. Oh dear, oh dear. I'm glad I'm blind and can't see them, the earthworm said, or I would probably scream. I hope they don't turn around and see us, Miss Spider stammered. Do you think they would eat us? The earthworm asked. They could eat you, the centipede answered, grinning. They would cut you up like a salami and eat you in thin slices. The poor earthworm began to quiver all over with fright. But what are they doing? The old green grasshopper whispered. I don't know, James answered softly. Let's watch and see. The cloud men were all standing in a group, and they were doing something peculiar with their hands. First, they would reach out all of them at once, and grabbed handfuls of cloud. Then they would roll these handfuls of cloud in their fingers until they turned into what looked like large white marbles. Then they would toss the marbles to one side and quickly grab more bits of cloud and start all over again. It was all very silent and mysterious. The pile of marbles beside them kept growing larger and larger. Soon there was a truckload of them there at least. They must be absolutely mad, the centipede said. There's nothing to be afraid of here. Be quiet, you pest, the earthworm whispered. We'll be eaten if they see us. But the cloud men were much too busy with what they were doing to have noticed the great peach floating silently up behind them. Then the watchers on the peach saw one of the cloud men raising his long, wispy arms above his head, and they heard him shouting, All right, boys, that's enough. Get the shovels. And all the other cloud men immediately let out a strange, high-pitched whoop of joy and started jumping up and down and waving their arms in the air. Then they picked up enormous shovels and rushed over to the pile of marbles and began shoveling them as fast as they could over the side of the cloud into space. Down they go, they chanted as they worked. Down they go, hail and snow, freezes and sneezes and noses will blow. It's hailstones, whispered James excitedly. They've been making hailstones, and now they're showering them down onto the people in the world below. Hailstones, the centipede said. That's ridiculous. This is summertime. You don't have hailstones in summertime. They're practicing for the winter, James told him. I don't believe it, shouted the centipede, raising his voice. Shh, the others whispered, and James said softly, For heaven's sake, centipede, don't make so much noise. The centipede roared with laughter. Those imbeciles couldn't hear anything, he cried. They're deaf as doorknobs. You watch. And before anyone could stop him, he had cupped his front feet to his mouth and was yelling at the cloud men as loud as he could. Hello! Half-wits, blunderheads, what on earth do you think you're doing over there? The effect was immediate. The cloud men jumped around as if they had been stung by wasps. And when they saw the great golden peach floating past them not 50 yards away in the sky, they gave a yelp of surprise and dropped their shovels to the ground. And there they stood with the moonlight streaming down all over them, absolutely motionless, like a group of tall, white, hairy statues, staring and staring at the gigantic fruit as it went sailing by. The passengers on the peach, all except the centipede, sat frozen with terror, looking back at the cloud men and wondering what was going to happen next. Now you've done it, you loathsome pest, whispered the earthworm to the centipede. I'm not frightened of them, shouted the centipede, and to show everybody once again that he wasn't, he stood up to his full height and started dancing about and making insulting signs at the cloud men with all 42 of his legs. This evidently infuriated the cloud men beyond belief. All at once, they spun around and grabbed great handfuls of hailstones and rushed to the edge of the cloud and started throwing them at the peach, shrieking with fury all the time. Look out, cried James. Quick, lie down. Lie flat on the deck. It was lucky they did. A large hailstone can hurt you as much as a rock or a lump of lead if it's thrown hard enough. And my goodness, how those cloudmen could throw. The hailstones came whizzing through the air like bullets from a gun, and James could hear them smashing against the sides of the peach and burying themselves inside with horrible squelching noises. Plop, 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 and then ping, 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 as they bounced off the poor ladybug's shell because she couldn't lie as flat as the others. Here's our cloud men, and there's the peach. And then, crack, as one of them hit the centipede right on the nose, and crack again as another one hit him somewhere else. Ow, he said. Stop it. But the cloud men had no intention of stopping. James could see them rushing about on the cloud like a lot of huge hairy ghosts, picking up hailstones from the pile, dashing to the edge of the cloud, hurling the hailstones at the peach, dashing back again to get more. And then when the pile of stones was all gone, they simply grabbed handfuls of cloud and made as many more as they wanted, and much bigger ones now, some of them as large as cannonballs. Quickly, cried James, down the tunnel or we'll all be wiped out. There was a rush for the tunnel entrance, and half a minute later everybody was safely downstairs inside the stone of the peach, trembling with fright and listening to the noise of the hailstones as they came crashing against the side of the peach. I'm wrecked, groaned the centipede. I'm wounded all over. It serves you right, said the earthworm. Would somebody kindly look and see if my shell is cracked? The ladybug said. Give us some light, shouted the old green grasshopper. I can't. They've broken my bulb, wailed the glowworm. Then put in another one, the centipede said. Be quiet a moment, said James. Listen, I do believe they're not hitting us anymore. They all stopped talking and listened. Yes, the noise had ceased. The hailstones were no longer smashing against the peach. We've left them behind. The seagulls must have pulled us away out of danger. Hooray, let's go up and see. Cautiously, with James going first, they all climbed back up the tunnel. James poked his head out and looked around. It's all clear, he called. I can't see them anymore. Chapter 28. One by one, the travelers came out again onto the top of the peach and gazed carefully around. The moon was still shining as brightly as ever, and there were still plenty of huge, shimmering cloud mountains on all sides. But there were no cloud men in sight now. The peach is leaking, shouted the old green grasshopper, peering over the side. It's full of holes and the juice is dripping out everywhere. That does it, cried the earthworm. The peach is leaking, then we shall surely sink. Oh, stop it. We're not in the water now, the centipede told him. Oh, look, shouted the ladybug. Look, over there. Everybody swung around to look. In the distance and directly ahead of them, they now saw a most extraordinary sight. It was a kind of arch, a colossal curvy-shaped thing that reached high up into the sky and came down again at both ends. The ends were resting upon a huge flat cloud that was as big as a desert. Now what in the world is that? Asked James. It's a bridge. It's an enormous hoop cut in half. It's a giant horseshoe standing upside down. Stop me if I'm wrong, murmured the centipede, going white in the face. But might not those be cloud men climbing all over it? There was a dreadful silence. The peach floated closer and closer. They are cloud men. There are hundreds of them. Thousands, millions. I don't want to hear about it, shrieked the poor blind earthworm. I'd rather be on the end of a fishhook and used as bait than come up against those terrible creatures again. I'd rather be fried alive, wailed the old green grasshopper. Please keep quiet, whispered James. It's our only hope. They crouched very still on top of the peach, staring at the cloud men. The whole surface of the cloud was literally swarming with them, and there were hundreds more up above, climbing about on that monstrous, crazy arch. But what is that thing, whispered the ladybug, and what are they doing to it? I don't care what they're doing to it, the centipede said, scuttling over to the tunnel entrance. I'm not staying up here. Goodbye. But the rest of them were too frightened or too hypnotized by the whole affair to make a move. Do you know what? James whispered. What? What? They said. That enormous arch, they seem to be painting it. They've got pots of paint and big brushes. Look. And he was quite right. The travelers were close enough now to see that this was exactly what the cloud men were doing. They all had huge brushes in their hand, and they were splashing the paint onto the great curvy arch in a frenzy of speed. So fast, in fact, that in a few minutes the whole of the arch became covered with the most glorious colors, reds and blues, greens, yellows, and purples. So what do you think they're making? That's right. It's a rainbow, everybody said at once. They're making a rainbow. Oh, isn't it beautiful? Just look at those colors. Centipede, they shouted, you must come up and see this. They were so enthralled by the beauty and brilliance of the rainbow that they forgot to keep their voices low any longer. The centipede poked his head cautiously out of the tunnel entrance. Well, he said, I've always wondered how those things were made. But why all the ropes? What are they doing with those ropes? Good heavens, they're pushing it off the cloud, cried James. There it goes. They're lowering it down to the earth with ropes. And I'll tell you something else, the centipede said sharply. If I'm not greatly mistaken, we ourselves are going to bump right into it. He's right, the old green grasshopper exclaimed. The rainbow was now dangling in the air below the cloud. The peach was also just below the level of the cloud, and it was heading directly toward the rainbow, traveling rather fast. We are lost, Miss Spider cried, wringing her feet again. The end has come. I can't stand it, wailed the earthworm. Tell me what's happening. We're going to miss it, shouted the ladybug. No, we're not. Yes, we are. Yes, no. Oh, my heavens. Hold on, everybody, James called out, and suddenly there was a tremendous thud as the peach went crashing into the top part of the rainbow. This was followed by an awful splintering noise as the enormous rainbow snapped right across the middle and became two separate pieces. The next thing that happened was extremely unfortunate. The ropes that the cloudmen had been using for lowering the rainbow got tangled up with the silk strings that went up from the peach to the seagulls. The peach was trapped. Panic and pandemonium broke out amongst the travelers, and James Henry Trotter, glancing up quickly, saw the faces of 1,000 furious cloudmen peering down at him over the edge of the cloud. The faces had almost no shape at all because of the long white hairs that covered them. There were no noses, no mouths, no ears, no chins. Only the eyes were visible in each face, two small black eyes, glinting malevolently through the hairs. That's a big word. And that means they're kind of just looking at them in a mean way, hoping to do them harm. Then came the most frightening thing of all. One cloudman, a huge hairy creature who must have been 14 feet tall at least, suddenly stood up and made a tremendous leap off the side of the cloud, trying to get to one of the silk strings above the peach. James and his friends saw him go flying through the air above them, his arms outstretched in front of him, reaching for the nearest strings. And they saw him grab it and cling to it with his hands and legs. And then very, very slowly, hand over hand, he began to come down the string. Mercy, help, save us, cried the ladybug. He's coming down to eat us, wailed the old green grasshopper. Jump overboard. Then eat the earthworm first, shouted the centipede. It's no good eating me. I'm full of bones like a kipper. Centipede, quickly, yelled James. Bite through that string, the one he's coming down on. The centipede rushed over to the stem of the peach and took the silk string in his teeth and bit through it with one snap of his jaws. Immediately, far above them, a single seagull was seen to come away from the rest of the flock and go flying off with a long string trailing from its neck and clinging desperately to the end of the string. Shouting with fury was the huge hairy cloudman. Up and up he went, swinging across the moonlit sky, and James Henry Trotter, watching him with delight, said, My goodness, he must weigh almost nothing at all for one seagull to be able to pull him up like that. He must be all hair and air. The rest of the cloudmen were so flabbergasted at seeing one of their company carried away in this manner that they let go the ropes they were holding, and then, of course, down went the rainbow, both halves of it together, tumbling toward the earth below. This freed the peach, which at once began sailing away from that terrible cloud. But the travelers were not in the clear yet. The infuriated cloudmen jumped up and ran after them along the cloud, pelting them mercilessly with all sorts of hard and horrible objects. Empty paint buckets, paintbrushes, step ladders, stools, saucepans, frying pans, rotten eggs, and bottles of hair oil. Anything those brutes could lay their hands on came raining down upon the peach. One cloudman, taking very careful aim, tipped a gallon of thick purple paint over the edge of the cloud right onto the centipede himself. The centipede screamed with anger. My legs, he cried. They're all sticking together. I can't walk. And my eyelids won't open. I can't see. And my boots are ruined. There he is, covered in purple paint. But for the moment, everyone was far too busy dodging the things that the cloudmen were throwing to pay any attention to the centipede. The paint is drying, he moaned. It's going hard. I can't move my legs. I can't move anything. You could still move your mouth, the earthworm said, and that is a great pity. James, bawled the centipede, please help me wash off this paint, scrape it off, anything. And I think that's where we'll stop for tonight. We'll have to wait and see what happens to the giant centipede covered in purple paint, whether he gets rescued by James or not, or whether he gets stuck together forever. I hope to see you next time for Page Turners on Monday at 6:30, and hopefully we'll be able to finish James and the Giant Peach, and we'll see how it ends. Bye. Have a good night.